I welcome our distinguished guests, excellencies, and participants. It is my great pleasure to welcome all of you to the UNU-WIDER Development Conference 2026 hosted by the ISID. We are delighted to have with us leading senior scholars, policymakers, and practitioners who have joined from different parts of the world. Your presence here reflects the shared commitment to advancing research on green industrialization and inclusive growth in a fractured world order, the central theme of this year's conference. Thank you all for being here to what promises to be a stimulating set of discussions over the next 2 days. We will now begin with the inaugural session of the conference. May I now request our distinguished guests to kindly come up on the stage for the inaugural session. For this, I would like to invite Mr. Suman Bery to join us on the stage. I request Professor Tshilidzi Marwala to join us. Mr. Stefan Priesner to join us on the stage. Professor Kunal, may we have you on the stage, please? Request Professor Nagesh Kumar to join us on the dais. Due to some urgent and unexpected commitments that have prevented Ambassador Sudhakar Dalela from joining us today, he has, however, sent his best wishes for the conference. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished panelists here with a warm round of applause. May I now request our distinguished guests to kindly proceed with the ceremonial lighting of the lamp, symbolizing the inauguration of the conference and the pursuit of knowledge. May we also invite Professor Deepak Nair, the Vice Chairman ISID and former Chairman of the WIDER Board, to join us at the lamp lighting ceremony. Can we have the lighter and the candle, Thank you. To begin the opening segment, I would like to invite Professor Nagesh Kumar to make his opening remarks.
Good evening, everyone. Our chief guest for this evening, Mr. Suman Bery, Rector, UNU, Professor Marwala, UN Resident Coordinator, Mr. Stefan Priesner, Professor Martha Chen, the Chairman of WIDER Board, Professor Eric Verhoeven, Dr. Zainab Usman, Professor Deepak Nair, Professor Prajapati Trivedi, Dr. Rakesh Mohan, Professor RKB, Professor Justin Lin, Professor Imran Walodia, Professor Kaushik Basu. I don't see some of these participants are in the room or not. My old and dear friend Kunal Sen, and also Patricia Justino, the Director Designate of WIDER, Excellencies, Ambassador Kimo of Finland, and representatives of ambassadors of Indonesia and Russia who are here, and all the very distinguished friends and colleagues. On behalf of the Institute for Studies in Industrial Development, ISID, it is an honor and privilege to welcome you all to this WIDER Development Conference 2026. And it is for the first time that the conference is held in New Delhi, and actually in the country first time. So it's a very big honor and privilege for ISID and for India. So I'm grateful to Kunal for thinking of bringing the conference to ISID and in Delhi. The conference theme, and I'm sure Kunal will talk about it and brief us why this theme was chosen, but the green industrialization and inclusive growth in a fractured world order resonates so well with India's current development priorities and challenges. As we all know, India has emerged from the COVID pandemic to be the fastest growing major economy, on the cusp of becoming the fourth largest this year, and to become the third largest in a couple of years. We have also adopted the Viksit Bharat, or a developed country by 2047 vision. Realization of that vision, we all are aware, requires that growth rate is accelerated further and become more job-oriented, job-creating and inclusive. Recognizing the manufacturing sector's potential for job creation, the government of India, over the past decade or so, adopted the Make in India initiative and Atmanirbhar Bharat programs. However, in this age of net zero, and every single country has taken some commitments to achieve net zero, industrialize first and clean up later is no more a relevant development strategy. So we need to combine the job creation, industrialization, and sustainability into the development strategy. And the green industrialization is the approach which can combine the imperatives of job creation and climate sustainability related matters or issues. However, the global economic order and also the global political order, which is currently in highly disturbed phase. So global economic order had changed for the past decade and has become less benign than it used to be earlier in the 1990s and the first decade of this century, where the phase of hyper-globalization was helping the countries that wanted to industrialize. So it had changed and become less benign, creating challenges for new industrializers or late industrializers. And in that context, this conference theme is of great relevance and is very timely for us in India and for the rest of the global south. But besides this timely theme, the conference is made special for two more regions. One of them is the BRICS presidency of India this year. And among the themes of the conference there is one theme about South-South cooperation, South-South trade. And BRICS has emerged over the last decade or so as an important forum for fostering South-South cooperation. So this is one important region that we feel happy that this year we are hosting this conference here in the year of BRICS presidency of India. Another region is that 2026, ISID is celebrating the 40th anniversary of its birth. And Professor Nair, our Vice Chairman, our very distinguished Vice Chairman, is here. And what could be a better way to celebrate the 40th anniversary than with a gathering of galaxy of academics joining us from around the world and have a discussion on the key challenges to development of the day. So with these words, I want to really welcome very warmly all of our participants and distinguished guests, especially our distinguished guests for this evening, Rector Marwala of the United Nations University, who I understand is a very renowned scientist, Mr. Priesner, the new face of the UN country team in India. I happen to be a past member of the UN country team, and so we're very delighted to have you here. Our keynote speaker, Professor Eric Verhoeven from Columbia University, a very well-known and eminent economist, whom we look forward to hear. And I'm especially delighted to welcome Mr. Suman Bery for for fitting this event in his very busy schedule, and as the Vice Chairman of NITI Aayog, and for our friends from outside India, NITI Aayog is the successor of India's Planning Commission, and as Vice Chairman of this body, of which Chairman is the Prime Minister himself, Suman is at the helm of guiding the development strategy and development policy agenda of the nation. So we are very honored to have you with us, Suman, this evening. With these words, let me welcome everyone once again, and I hope the friends from outside the country will have enjoyable time in Delhi. And we really look forward to working with all of you over the next 2.5 days for productive exchange of ideas. I thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kumar, for those opening remarks and for setting the context of the conference. May I now invite Professor Kunal Sen to deliver the opening remarks.
Good evening, colleagues and distinguished guests. It's a real pleasure to welcome you to the opening of the 2026 WIDER Development Conference here in New Delhi, hosted in partnership with the Institute for Studies in Industrial Development. Let me begin by thanking all of you here, especially those who have traveled long distances to get here, to join us at a time when travel and logistics have been made much more difficult because of the conflict in the Middle East. The fact that so many of you are here, especially those who travel long distances, despite these disruptions, is greatly appreciated. It is also unfortunately a reminder of just how relevant and how urgent our conference theme is. When we speak of a fractured world order, we're not referring to an abstract concept. We're speaking about real conflicts, real uncertainty, and real consequences for countries, institutions, and people. Our conference theme, green industrialization and inclusive growth in a fractured world order is deliberately direct. It captures the core challenges facing development today: how to create decent jobs, raise productivity, and expand opportunities, while also responding to climate risk and navigating a more uncertain global economic environment. Let me frame our discussions with two realities: one more sobering and one more hopeful. First, a note of realism. We are meeting at a moment when many of the assumptions that shaped development over the past few decades are under strain. Global economic governance is not keeping pace with change. Trade and investment relations are becoming more fragmented. Development finance gaps are widening in many settings, and debt vulnerabilities remain acute. All of this is happening while the climate transition is no longer a distant agenda item, but an immediate constraint and an immediate opportunity. But alongside this realism, I want to underline a genuine reason for optimism. The second reality is that the global south is increasingly central to the future of the global economy, in production, in innovation, in markets, and in ideas. We see deeper south-south link in trade, investment, technology, and we see a growing appetite for new approaches to development cooperation, economic governance that are coming from the global south to reflect better realities and today's realities. And this is precisely why industrial policy, which is the theme of this keynote today, is back at the center of policy debate. For many countries, the question is no longer whether the state has a role to shape structural change, but how to do it effectively, and how to do it in ways that are both green and inclusive. Industrial policy is being asked to deliver multiple objectives at the same time: faster productivity growth, resilient supply chains, better jobs, technological upgrading, and a credible pathway to net zero emissions. And here, India is the fitting place to have this conversation, not only because of India's current economic weight and policy debates, but also because of the longer intellectual history that UNU-WIDER has with India. When I was a graduate student, I first encountered UNU-WIDER through the works that have become classics in development economics, including Hunger and Public Action by Jean Drèze and Amartya Sen. That tradition of combining rigorous analysis with a clear moral purpose to expand human well-being and reduce deprivation remains very much alive in the work of UNU-WIDER today. There's another surprising fact of India's connection to UNU-WIDER, which many of you would not know about. And what is it? It is that India, along with Finland, Japan, and Sweden, contributed to the endowment of UNU-WIDER in its fairly early years. And that endowment has been critical for UNU-WIDER's success in providing a solid base for its growth over the last 40 years. So over the next 3 days, our aim is straightforward: to bring together researchers, policymakers, and practitioners to examine what a new era of industrial development can look like in practice, what is working, what is not, and what can be adopted across contexts, especially in a world where all certainties about global cooperation are weaker than they once were. Before I close, let me warmly thank our partners here in New Delhi: the Institute for Studies in Industrial Development, ISID, for hosting this conference with us. ISID has been an amazing and outstanding partner in shaping this event, and especially fitting to be working together at a moment when the Institute is celebrating its 40th anniversary year, which we did ourselves in UNU-WIDER last year. I also like to acknowledge Professor Nagesh Kumar, Director of ISID, for his leadership and partnership in bringing this conference together. This wouldn't have happened without the cooperation that we have seen between UNU-WIDER and ISID for the last several months. Under his direction, ISID continues to make an important contribution to research and policy debate on industrial development, structural change, and sustainable growth. I also want to turn now to the focus of this particular inaugural session, the lecture, delivered by one of the leading experts on firm-level barriers to industrial transformation in developing countries, Professor Erik Verhoeven. Our keynote will help set the tone for the conference for speaking directly to the role of industrial policy. And to the central question we turn to again and again, how to get growth going, but at the right type, growth that creates opportunity without deepening inequality or destroying the environment. Thank you for joining us. I hope you find the discussion stimulating for the next 3 days and encourage you to engage actively throughout the conference, in the sessions, during breaks, in social media, and with our poster presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sen, for those remarks. We will now proceed to the special remarks. It is my privilege to invite Professor Stefan Priesner to deliver his remarks. So please.
Suman Bery, Honourable Vice Chairman NITI Aayog, Professor Tshilidzi Marwala, Rector of the United Nations University and Under-Secretary General, Nagesh Kumar, Director of ISID, and Kunal Sen, Director of UNU-WIDER. Distinguished guests, Excellencies, Namaste. For those of you who come from afar, very warm welcome to Delhi. Very nice meeting all of you, and a warm greetings on behalf of the United Nations in India. The previous speaker talked about an inspiration during graduate times, and I also would like to start with that. I was a postgraduate student at Johns Hopkins University and decided to write my thesis on the concept of gross national happiness in Bhutan, which at that time was not researched. This was the beginning of the 90s. And my interest of the subject came from the conviction that gross domestic product was a dangerously thin measure of what development is all about. And that conviction did not come from anywhere. It came from Amartya Sen's capability approach, from the idea that development is the expansion of real human freedoms, and from the recognition that this idea was itself forged in large part from India's own experience. The Bengal famine, the constitutional ambitions of a newly independent republic, the democratic institutions that gave ordinary people a voice in their own development in ways few post-colonial states managed. These debates have shaped development economics for decades, and both India and UNU-WIDER have been at the heart of them. I feel honored and privileged, therefore, that UNU-WIDER and ISID have brought today's most pressing development debates to Delhi at this fragile time. Indeed, we meet at a moment of profound fracture in the global order. The multilateral system is weakened, the development finance gap is widening, geopolitical realignment is accelerating, and the burden, as always, falls heaviest on countries least able to absorb it. In this environment, the theme of this conference, green industrialization, inclusive growth, fractured world order, is extremely timely, embracing the central policy challenges of our time. India's position in this moment can be seen as one of a bridge. India maintains constructive relationships across every major geopolitical divide, with the global south and the global north, with BRICS partners, with G7 economies. It does not fit neatly into any emerging bloc. That is not a weakness, it's a form of structural power that very few countries possess, and it carries real responsibility. India's BRICS presidency this year is an opportunity to exercise this responsibility, to reframe South-South cooperation, not as a counterbloc, but as a contribution to renewed multilateralism, to advance reform of the international financial architecture, to champion the policy space that developing countries need to build the industries of the future without being caught between competing great power interests. And as the Beyond 2030 conversations begin in earnest, India may wish to be shaping the agenda, not just responding to it. The intellectual traditions this country contributed to the world, the capability approach, multidimensional poverty measurement, the long debate about what growth is actually for, are precisely the frameworks the post-2030 agenda needs. The Beyond GDP movement is in no small part an Indian intellectual inheritance. It is time to claim it. What India and the United Nations are building together at the moment, and we have long gone beyond the traditional relationship with India from the side of the United Nations, is something very interesting, a genuine partnership in which Indian experience, Indian innovation, and Indian institutional knowledge are co-created into best practices that travel through South-South cooperation to countries across Asia, Africa, and beyond. India's breakthrough in digital public infrastructure, in direct benefit transfers, in last-mile health delivery are not just national achievements, they are global public goods in the making. Yet real puzzles remain, and the UN stands ready to work on them alongside government and other stakeholders, such as the stubbornly low female labor force participation, such as the malnutrition burden, such as the structural transformation to still create quality jobs at scale, and such as the defining challenges of the net zero promise, greening the manufacturing base, accelerating climate action, closing the staggering gap in transition finance. The opportunity, of course, is equally significant. India's renewable energy sector is expected to create over 3 million jobs by 2030. India's green economy could create 48 million full-time equivalent jobs by 2047 and attract 4.1 trillion in investments as the country builds new value chains in clean energy, circular manufacturing, bio-based materials, and nature-based solution. The transition, therefore, presents a major development opportunity. UNU-WIDER and ISID have brought together some of the world's sharpest development thinkers in this city. At this very moment, the knowledge in this room over the next 3 days is a serious resource. I look forward to ambitious, engaged, and stimulating discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Priesner, for those valuable remarks. May I now invite Professor Tshilidzi Marwala to kindly share his thoughts with us.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends. It is a great pleasure to join you here in New Delhi for this year's wider development conference. We gather at a moment of profound global transition. The international system is experiencing fragmentation. Multilateral institutions are under strain. Trust between nations and within societies is increasingly fragile. This comes at a time when global climate crisis is accelerating, technological change is disrupting labor markets, and development finance gaps are widening. In this context, a fundamental question emerges. What is the role of knowledge institutions in a fractured world? The United Nations University was founded more than 50 years ago on a simple but powerful idea that rigorous independent knowledge can help bridge international divides. That scholarship, when connected to global policy making, but grounded in local realities, can strengthen cooperation rather than weaken it. UNU-WIDER has embodied that mission since its founding in 1985 as UNU's very first research institute. For over 4 decades, it has brought together scholars and policy makers from around the world to examine inequality, growth, physical space, and governance. It has served as a bridge between the global north and south, between research and policy, between theory and practice. Importantly, UNU-WIDER has always engaged deeply with the global south, not as a subject of study, but as a partner in shaping knowledge. It was founded with contributions from both Finland and India, and leading thinkers from India, including Nobel laureate Amartya Sen, have defined its early intellectual direction. It is therefore especially meaningful that this conference takes place here in India at a time when the global south is playing a central role in reshaping the global economic order. In a fractured world, knowledge institutions must do 3 things. First, we must defend the space for evidence-based dialogue. When geopolitics becomes polarized, facts become contested. Universities and research institutes must safeguard intellectual independence and methodological rigor. Second, we must connect knowledge to action. Research that does not inform policy risks being irrelevant. Research that informs policy without independence risks losing credibility. The strength of institutions such as UNU-WIDER lies precisely in maintaining both these issues. Third, we must build networks of trust. Fragmentation is not only institutional, it is relational. Conferences such as this one create spaces where policymakers, scholars, and practitioners can engage across differences. These spaces are not peripheral. They are essential to multilateral cooperation. The theme of this conference, green industrialization and inclusive growth in a fractured world order, reflects this dual challenge. We must transform our economies while maintaining social cohesion. We must pursue industrial policy while respecting ecological limits. We must foster growth while reducing inequality. These are not separate agendas. They are interconnected. As the internal think tank and academic arm of the United Nations University is uniquely positioned to convene conversations that are global in perspective, yet attentive to local realities. Through UNU-WIDER and our broader network, our goal is to support countries in navigating this moment of transition with evidence, insight, and humility. Let me conclude with this reflection. Fragmentation is not destiny. The international system has faced moments of rupture. And in this, on this issue, I am reminded of the book by Charles Dickens. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. But this is neither the worst of times nor the best of times. But it is through the work that we do in rooms like this that we create a world which becomes the best we can be able to achieve. What has sustained cooperation across decades is not simply diplomacy or finance. It is shared understanding. And shared understanding begins with knowledge. Knowledge that is not biased. Knowledge that does not have any agenda except to inform and to inform people fairly. Allow me to express our deep appreciation to the government and the people of India for the warm welcome we have received and for the privilege of gathering here in New Delhi for this year's Wider Development Conference. I have visited India more than 10 times, but this is the first time I am visiting ever since 2009. And I have seen many of the developments with my own eyes. We are especially grateful to the Institute for Studies in Industrial Development for hosting us on their campus to create an inspiring setting for the next 3 days of discussion and collaborations. Finally, I would like to commend my colleagues at UNU-WIDER. And I will start with the board under the dynamic leadership of Professor Martin. Please stand up so that you can be applauded for the excellent leadership. And board members, please stand up so that you can also, all of you can be seen and be applauded. And of course, the outgoing director, Kunal Sen, and also the incoming director, Patricia. The work ahead is important. We cannot fail in our work. And I also would like to thank United Nations University, WIDER, and all our partners for continuing to work with us. And of course, the legacy of United Nations University is the legacy of UNU-WIDER. And we do this work not because of just doing the work. We want to change society and to change society for the better. And I wish you a productive and forward-looking conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Marwala, for enriching the session with your views. We will now move to the inaugural address. It is my privilege and honor to invite Mr. Suman Bery, whose leadership and contributions to public policy are widely recognized, to deliver the inaugural address. May I request you, sir, to please kindly address the gathering. Please be careful with the gap.
Oh, yeah, okay, fine, good. Wow, the rector's address is a hard act to follow. I would really call that the inaugural address and consider myself to be the wind-up act, but nonetheless. So a pleasure to meet you, sir, and the power and conviction of your comments were evident. As somebody who had the privilege of visiting the UNU in David Malone's time, it's in obviously very good hands. Nice to meet you. Dignitaries on the dais, I won't go through the whole list, but I would include Anjali, who once worked for me, our MC as well, but also to acknowledge a certain amount of nervousness at having to address a group of people who are scholars. I don't consider myself a scholar as such, but also people who have been very important in guiding me over my quarter century back in India. I would particularly acknowledge the presence of Rakesh Mohan, who I took over from at NCAR, and not only inherited a very fine group of scholars, including Anjali, but also in seeing Indian industrialization through his eyes. He was a member of the Abid Hussain Committee, and I think has tracked what has happened in Indian manufacturing over the years. And I owe to him the insight that, look, we are concerned about small and medium enterprises, but really what India needs is scale. Deepak Nair, who has been a friend and whose late wife was also on my board, many others here as well. And I'm pleased that there's no question and answer following this, because I'm not sure that I would be up to it. Let me also acknowledge the presence of the Finnish ambassador in the room. So I'm not quite sure what an inaugural address or keynote address is meant to do, but I would offer 5 framing questions which are not meant to be irreverent, but I think are meant to get us to think about both the opportunities and the challenges at the present time. And so the 5 framing questions, and I think the questions in many ways are as important as the answers, are: should we be pleased by the relative success of the BRICS economies in catching up with the G7 over the last quarter century? And I've used those two, as it were, collectives for a couple of reasons. First, I thought I would be following Ambassador Dalela, who is our Sherpa for the BRICS. And second, because to some extent I see the BRICS as a response to the G7. I'm going to come back in a little bit to how useful the North-South classification is, but let me just stick with that polarity. And so if the answer to the question of whether we should be pleased by the relative success is yes, and I think the answer is more modulated than that as we go through each individual country, then what needs to change now and why? So if we've had a good run, or if some countries have had a good run, what is the reason for thinking that that model is broke? And I'll have a couple of observations of that. And the question is, first of all, for the BRICS, because that's convenient, but then also for others in the global south. My third question would be, has manufacturing been central to past success? And again, the answer to that is variegated. And as is implicit in, well, the term used is industrialization, but I think many of us see that as a proxy for manufacturing, although mining is an important part of it, and construction, I believe, is also an important part of it. But I think quite a bit of the discussion, certainly that of the inaugural lecture, is about manufacturing. So I think, and we ourselves are very focused on manufacturing. So the question of, has it been central, and can it remain critical to our future success? And then finally, the point that the resident coordinator made, which is, how important is India to the story? And let me just say how, how privileged I am to be the main point of contact with the UN system here, and also to represent India at ECOSOC's high-level political forum on the SDGs. Now, we know that that at least where the share of the global economy is concerned, the BRICS economies have narrowed the gap with the G7 at purchasing power parity terms. The G7's share of global GDP declined from about 44% in 2000 to approximately 30% by 2025, and emerging economies as a group gained ground. And it's worth saying that this transformation was anticipated in 2003 to some extent by Jim O'Neill's Dreaming with BRICS, the path to 2050. His argument then was about Brazil, Russia, India, and China. This group then co-opted South Africa to turn BRIC, which was in the title of the O'Neill paper, to BRICS. And that's going to be the cohort I'm going to talk about. And I think 2 points, just to take us back to that time, and I'm old enough to have lived through that time. First, that it was in 1981 when developing economies started to be called emerging markets, and this was actually by Antoine van Akmel at the IFC in those days. And just to say that before that, essentially going back to Gunnar Myrdal, developing economies were seen as basket cases, except for a few who had sort of escaped. And what Jim O'Neill said in his paper was that that was not the way to think of it, that the future was with the BRICS. This may seem commonplace now, but at the time it was close to being revolutionary. And the argument for it at that time, and that I think has been vindicated, is that it was demographics and productivity that were what was going to be behind this transformation of the world. So, the fact of the matter is that more than many of us who worked in development at that time, in fact, I had just moved back from the World Bank to NCAR about the time the paper came out, we would have been very pleased about the shift in global economic activity and power that has taken place in the last quarter century. And so does that mean that we shouldn't be hand-wringing, that we shouldn't be... I think we should celebrate success is really the point I'm trying to make. And therefore, I think we need to be a bit circumspect about what is the baby and what is the bathwater, and not throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Now, there are differences in the relative success of the BRICS countries. I think it's fair to say that India and China had fared better because they were poorer, and because they had the demographic tailwinds, China earlier, India arguably now. And I think the productivity story is also quite differentiated. So some numbers that my team who are in the audience have put together is that China in 2000 was 4% of labor productivity of the US, and by 2024 was 24% of the labor productivity of the US. And I'll motivate the focus on labor productivity with respect to India in a minute. Russia, on the other hand, so there was massive narrowing of the productivity gap. Russia, actually, there was a slight narrowing. It went from 22% of US levels at that time to 22% of US levels in 2024. Brazil, unfortunately, there was a slight widening of labor productivity, with the US being 100%. It went from 25% to 21 to 23%. South Africa, there was also a widening. And in India's, so it went from 30% down to 24%. And so in India's case, we were 5% of US productivity levels in 2000, and we're around 11 to 13% today. And so as we look to the future, to me, the real questions are about what are the opportunities and what are the challenges for raising labor productivity in very different contexts. The labor productivity data come from the ILO. So for a country like India, which is by some distance the least affluent member of the G20 and I think of the BRICS as well, we are faced with the challenge of, well, we need to increase labor productivity because we know that labor productivity growth is very highly correlated with per capita income growth, but secondly, because people want better jobs and they want better pay, and you're not going to get better pay until your labor productivity rises. So the issue of raising, as it were, income levels for people who want to benefit from growth boils down in many ways to a question of labor productivity. But the same issue also applies for countries which have gone beyond the demographic transition, and that includes a lot of Asia for demographic reasons, Thailand, China, etc. And so I just want to say that as the discussion goes forward in the next 3 days, I think a question I'd like to put in your mind is how much of what is being discussed is about raising labor productivity in a range of countries. Let's talk about the BRICS, but also more broadly the global South. What are the opportunities and or how is the world different and what are the opportunities and challenges? So the way I see the opportunities is that technology-driven growth, at least in India, is seen as an opportunity. Okay, we've just had an AI Impact Summit. It is going to involve a shift of opportunities, and I'll come to that as a challenge. But you know, certainly reporting as I do to our Prime Minister, who is a fervent technophile, he believes technology is actually the way in which India can accelerate its growth and higher quality growth. Second, and this is you know, an insight that I owe to Ricardo Hausmann at Harvard, is that the energy transitions may favor the global South. And his argument, which I think makes sense, is that that the world of the last 50, 60 years, because the world of crude oil is really post-war, was a world with mobile energy. And basically all of the investment was, as we are seeing in the Straits of Hormuz, about easily transported fossil energy, coal being something of an exception, whereas the natural endowment of an India or of the South is sunshine, wind, etc. And his argument is, and it's a plausible one, that if we can finance the energy transition to benefit from the lower levelized cost of the new energy sources, that could be a source of competitive advantage. So that's a second tailwind. And I think these provide an opportunity for leapfrogging traditional pathways, but, and I'll come to the manufacturing issue in just a minute, but it also does include quite probably the obsolescence of existing human capital. And so in India, and of course there's been good work done by the IHD on this, the question of what constitutes not just the skilling challenge, but the education challenge to keep up with the change in job opportunities, I think is a huge issue, not just for India, but for many countries that otherwise stand to benefit. I also think, and I don't see a track on that in the conference schedule, I do think that this is going to be require a major shake-up, certainly in India, probably elsewhere, of the fiscal architecture. To a surprising degree, the fiscal architecture has been bound up with the fossil fossil energy situation. And then, of course, supply chain disruption, and as the RC indicated, massive financing constraints. So I would say that, I've almost certainly exceeded my time, but those before me did, and so I feel I'm given that license. So let me just make two final points. First, on manufacturing. India itself is, if you like, fixated on manufacturing. I would hope, and of course ISID is in many ways the royal chapel or the high priest in thinking about these things, but I would want greater clarity on what we want manufacturing for. Is it for employment, the Lewis model? Is it for economic security? Because a country that is concerned about its strategic autonomy can't afford to outsource its manufacturing. Is it because technological change happens fastest in manufacturing? I'm not going to answer these questions, but let me just say that one of the reasons India has been going around and signing all these FTAs is in the hope that this might spark the manufacturing revolution over here. But let me also say that somewhat counterintuitively, my colleague Arvind Virmani, who is thinking deeply about these things, he actually believes that it will be easier for India's semi-skilled labor to make transitions to the services sector rather than leap to, as it were, the high quality or the high ambition manufacturing, which now high-tech manufacturing, which seems now to be the norm, and which, of course, China has mastered so brilliantly. And then finally, South-North. I'm struck by the following, that when John Maynard Keynes wrote on India, and he wrote quite a bit on India, he did not see the Indian economy as a separate animal from the UK economy. His treatise on money, etc. India was considered, and it was important to the British Crown, it was considered a serious place. I do think that the division of the world into North and South was a product of the Cold War and also of what I might call the American school of development economics. I'm a little hard-pressed today, and of course it generated privileges like special and differential treatment in the WTO, the the formulation in the UNFCCC, etc. But I think that we exist to absorb technology from wherever it's being generated. A lot of that technology is being generated in the north. And I think that softening the dividing lines, at least as economists, maybe not as diplomats, would be something that I would vote for rather than further polarization. Thank you for your attention, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, sir, for your inspiring inaugural address and for sharing your valuable perspectives with us today. We are truly grateful for your presence and for your guidance. Professor Nagesh, Kumar has some acknowledgements of presence to make.
Basically, I wanted to, in India, we have this tradition of vote of thanks to our very distinguished, speakers. And so just wanted to propose a vote of thanks. But before that, let me complete the list of very distinguished people who are in the room, and some of whom I listed, and some I somehow slipped doing that. So I want to recognize also the presence of Dr. Cristiano Pessini, the UNIDO Director in Delhi. Yes, Professor Prajapati Trivedi, who had joined recently ISID board, and former Secretary to Government of India, and also professor at the Harvard Kennedy School, Mr. Ajay Shankar, former Industry Secretary and also a member of ISID board. My very dear friend, Professor Alak Sharma, and Professor Shanta Devarajan. So there are many in the room, and I would not like to now, go on listing, but every single one is very, very important and distinguished in his or her own right. Now, I think this discussion, which is started just an hour ago, has been most scintillating that I could think of on reflecting on the theme that we have for this wider development conference 2026. And every single one, starting with Stefan and Rector Marwala, and our very distinguished chief guest, Suman, really built upon and raised all the pertinent issues that we need to be discussing over the next 2 days. So Kunal and I will make sure that we get answers to some of the questions which have been raised, and come back with some report summarizing some of the lessons. So thank you very much indeed for this very enriching discussion, Suman and every one of the speakers this evening. Thank you.
We now have a very quick session for memento presentation, for which I request our youngest fraternities to bring the memento on the stage. May I now request Professor Deepak Nair to join us on the stage and present the memento to Professor Tshilidzi Marwala. So may we please have you on the stage? Yeah, please take it to Professor. Just join, go after him, go after him. May I now request Professor Prajapati Trivedi to present the memento to Mr. Suman Bery, please. I was just seeing him. So maybe, sir, you could do? Professor Nagesh, you could do that? I request Mr. Ajay Shankar to present the memento to Mr. Stefan Priesner. Yes, sir. There's one more? No. Yes, sir. I'm now requesting Professor Nagesh Kumar to present the memento to Professor Kunal Sen. Thank you so much. May we have the speakers around the area for a group photograph, please? Yeah.